The judge's voice cut through the silence, "Mr. Brooks, please rise." And in that moment, the entire courtroom froze because everyone knew Leonard Brooks was paralyzed from the waist down. But what happened next? No one, not even the judge herself, was prepared for. Hi, everyone. Today we're stepping into a courtroom in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, where something unforgettable happened. It didn't involve a celebrity, a high-profile scandal, or a shouting match. It started with a man who rarely spoke, who spent most of his days helping his neighbors, raising his niece, and trying to stay out of the way. His name was Leonard Brooks. Most people just called him Lenny. He was 68, a retired Army medic, and paralyzed from the waist down. What happened inside that courtroom would stop everyone, judge, jury, strangers, and even those who thought they already had him figured out. And it all began with a single sentence. "Please rise. This could happen to anyone, even you." So before we dive into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. The courtroom was already warm that Monday morning in Tuscaloosa, but no one dared fan themselves. Not with Judge Noelle Hartley seated high behind the bench, her eyes like polished glass, her black robe as pressed and silent as the air in the room. She didn't allow cell phones. She didn't tolerate murmurs, and she especially didn't entertain theatrics. The people in the gallery, all 40 or so, sat upright, even the ones who didn't know Lenny personally, because word had gotten around. This wasn't a typical assault case. This was about a man most folks had seen picking up trash along the roadside from his wheelchair. A man who cooked for church picnics and never turned down a request for help so long as he could physically do it. Lenny sat in the defendant's chair near the front, his shoulders squared his lap, neat, his hands resting on the arms of his wheelchair. His niece Tasha sat 3 rows back, her backpack still on her hands folded tight around the straps. She looked small in that big wooden bench, her eyes bouncing from her uncle to the judge, to the TV news camera quietly stationed in the back corner. Across the aisle sat Darren Walsh, white mid-30s, stiff-collared and red-cheeked. He looked uncomfortable in his jacket, but not because it didn't fit, because it didn't belong to him. He was the man who'd filed the charges, the man who'd been struck once in the face by Lenny, the man who said it was totally unprovoked. The district attorney, a woman named Connolly, opened the proceedings with a clean voice and a tight smile. "Your Honor, this case is straightforward. Mr. Brooks, a decorated veteran, struck Mr. Walsh in a public parking lot. While the circumstances may be debated, the injury is real. Mr. Walsh sustained a fractured cheekbone and 2 loosened teeth. There was no weapon involved, but the blow was enough to require medical treatment. We are asking the court to consider second-degree assault under Alabama law." The phrase "decorated veteran" hung in the air like a smudge. It was a label that tried to offer respect while stripping it away in the next breath. Judge Hartley didn't flinch. "Mr. Brooks has no prior convictions, none, Your Honor, and he was arrested at the scene." "Yes." "Without resistance." "Yes." She nodded and looked at the defense table. "Mr. Ellis, you may proceed." Lenny's public defender. Jacob Ellis was younger than most of the jurors. His voice had cracked once during the pretrial motions and hadn't recovered since. But he stood up anyway, adjusted his tie, and said, "This case is not as simple as it sounds. Mr. Brooks is not denying that he struck Mr. Walsh. But the reason he did is something we cannot ignore. This wasn't a brawl. This wasn't a dispute over money or ego. This was about protection, about fear." He turned slightly toward the jury. "You'll hear from a 14-year-old girl, Mr. Brooks's niece, who was cornered by a man twice her size in a grocery store parking lot. You'll see footage from a camera mounted on the store's awning. You'll hear testimony from 2 witnesses. And by the end, I believe you'll understand that what happened wasn't assault. It was an act of restraint that could have gone much further, but didn't." The first piece of evidence was played on the courtroom screen, grainy black and white footage that showed only part of the parking lot. There was Lenny's wheelchair, slow but steady, turning toward a girl standing still. Tasha. The man in front of her was pointing, leaning, stepping forward. You couldn't hear a thing, but you didn't need to. The girl's body language told the story. She flinched. Her shoulders curled inward. Her hands rose, palms up. Then Lenny moved fast for someone with wheels, and the next moment Darren was on the ground. Some folks in the back of the courtroom exhaled. Not because it was dramatic, but because it confirmed something they'd already believed. Tasha was called to the stand next. She didn't cry. She didn't look at Darren. Her voice barely traveled beyond the microphone, but everyone leaned in anyway. "He told me I didn't belong there," she said. "He wouldn't let me pass. My uncle said, 'Is there a problem here?' And then he hit him." "Did you feel threatened?" Ellis asked. "Yes." "Did the man say anything that made you afraid?" She paused. "He said people like me didn't know how to act right, that I was a little street rat who needed to be shown respect. And did you believe he meant harm?" Her eyes shifted toward the jury. "I believed he wasn't going to let me go unless someone stopped him." That was the moment it all started to shift. Even the bailiff's arms folded across his chest seemed to loosen a little. Judge Hartley didn't speak, didn't change her expression, but a thin crease had appeared between her brows. When Darren took the stand, he fumbled with his sleeve buttons. His voice was louder than it needed to be. "I was just telling her to be more careful. She bumped into my nephew. I didn't threaten anyone." Ellis's cross-examination was brief. "Mr. Walsh, is it true you stepped in front of a minor who was walking alone?" "She bumped into us. I was just addressing that." "Is it true you called her names?" "I don't recall." "Do you recall being struck in the face?" "I do." "Do you recall what the girl said after you were hit?" She said, thank you." That last sentence didn't register with the prosecution, but it registered with the room. Judge Hartley called for a recess. When she returned, she looked tired, but her posture didn't soften. Her tone didn't waver. "Mr. Brooks," she said, lifting her chin, "please rise." Lenny didn't react right away. Maybe he didn't believe what he'd heard. Maybe he didn't want to believe it. "Please rise," Judge Hartley said again, her voice steady, her expression unreadable. But there was something in the silence that followed something so charged, even the creak of a bench sounded like thunder. Jacob Ellis turned to his client, confused. "Your Honor," he began softly, "Mr. Brooks is paralyzed. He's unable to." But Lenny raised one hand slowly. Not to speak, just to stop his attorney from finishing that sentence. With quiet resolve, he placed his palms firmly on the arms of his wheelchair. His muscles weakened over the years, but not forgotten, tightened. His jaw clenched. His shoulders tensed. A tremor passed through his arms like a ripple over still water. The entire courtroom held its breath. Tasha gasped, her small hand flying to her mouth. Someone in the back whispered, "Oh my God!" Lenny pushed. His arms strained. The veins in his neck pulsed. Inch by inch, his body rose, not fully, not gracefully, but undeniably. He lifted himself a few inches off the cushion of his chair. His eyes didn't look up. His lips didn't move. But his presence filled every corner of that courtroom. And then, just as slowly, his knees buckled. Gravity pulled him back down. He landed with a soft thump, exhaling hard, chest heaving. No one moved. Not even Judge Hartley. Her pen, once poised between her fingers, now rested motionless on her pad. The court reporter had stopped typing. Even Darren looked like someone had poured cold water over him. Lenny didn't speak. He didn't have to. What he had just done, what he had tried to do, was louder than any testimony. The judge stood abruptly, her face flushed, and without a word left the bench. Inside the courtroom, there was no gavel, no instruction, just the aftermath. Jacob Ellis turned to Lenny, whispering, "What was that?" Lenny didn't answer right away. He adjusted the lap blanket over his knees, then said quietly, "Maybe she needed to see it." It took nearly 5 minutes for Judge Hartley to return. When she did, her robe was gone. She wore a slate gray blazer now, and her hair was slightly looser around her face. Her hands trembled just enough to be noticed. She looked out at the room and said softly, "We're going to recess until tomorrow at 10 a.m. This court is now adjourned." The gallery didn't erupt. No chatter, no outrage. Just that same strange hush as people stood and slowly filed out, some dabbing their eyes, others avoiding eye contact altogether. Outside the courthouse, the reporters waited, cameras rolling, ready to shout questions. But Lenny didn't stop. He didn't speak. Tasha walked beside him down the ramp, her fingers clutching the handle of his chair. The sun hit her face and she squinted up at him. "Uncle Lenny," she whispered, "you didn't have to do that." He gave her a sideways look. "Yeah, I did." That night, Tuscaloosa buzzed. Clips of the courtroom moment began to surface on social media. People posted it with captions like, "He tried to stand." And the judge walked out. A local reporter from Channel 6 called it the moment that changed the tone of the trial. At home, Lenny sat in his living room while Tasha did her homework nearby. The news played softly in the background, but he wasn't listening. He was thinking about his sister, about promises he made long before Tasha knew what they meant. It had been almost 5 years since her passing. A sudden brain aneurysm, no warning. Lenny didn't hesitate. He took custody of her daughter. He didn't know if he'd be any good at it, but he showed up every morning, made peanut butter toast, remembered which juice she liked, learned how to braid hair poorly, but with heart. They had their rituals. Every Friday night, they'd watch an old Western and rate the cowboy hats. On Sundays, they'd ride the bus to church, and afterward, they'd buy pecan pie from Mrs. Beverly's bakery, even if they didn't finish it. Lenny wasn't a man of words. His love didn't come in speeches. It came in showing up, in knowing her favorite pencil brand, in reminding her to zip her jacket. And that's what made the moment outside the supermarket hit harder than it should have. It was a regular Thursday evening. He had picked up eggs and bread, was about to unlock his van when he saw her. Tasha standing stiff near the edge of the lot, her book bag slipping off one shoulder, and Darren Walsh, loud-looming and red-faced, was pointing down at her like she'd committed a crime. Lenny rolled over, calm, controlled. "Is there a problem here?" he asked. Darren turned and said something about respect in teaching kids to behave, and Lenny just stood, well sat his ground, until Darren stepped forward. One hand raised, one foot planted too close. That was it, the trigger. Lenny's army training didn't scream. It didn't snap. It moved. One open palm, a measured strike. Darren staggered back, fell. Tasha didn't scream. She whispered, "Thank you." And then came the sirens, the questions, the cuffs. He told the officers what happened, told them he struck the man once, showed them his ID, his veteran's card, asked only one thing: "Can someone get my niece home?" That's who he was, still is. The morning after court, Lenny woke early, not from an alarm, from habit. He brewed coffee, buttered toast for Tasha, and sat by the window until it was time to head back downtown. At 9:58 a.m., courtroom 4A filled even faster than the day before. Judge Hartley entered, not in her robe, but again in a blazer. Her face was calm but human now, not hard, not unbreakable. "Mr. Brooks," she said as the room settled, "you may address the court." Lenny didn't shift, didn't clear his throat. He simply spoke. "I'm not here to excuse what I did," he said. "I struck a man. That's a fact. But I didn't do it out of rage. I did it because I saw someone I love being cornered, and I knew how fast words can turn into something else." He paused. "I've zipped body bags closed on friends in the field who never saw it coming. You don't wait when danger's close. You don't gamble with a child's safety." He turned ever so slightly toward the jury. "I may not walk, but I stand for her, and I'd do it again if I had to." Then he was silent. Judge Hartley folded her hands in front of her. She didn't speak right away. The room pulsed with anticipation, but the sentence didn't come just yet. Judge Hartley didn't reach for her notes. She didn't look down at her legal pad or recite anything rehearsed. Instead, she just sat there for a long, still moment, with her eyes fixed on Lenny. There was something in the set of her jaw and the slight tremble of her fingers, laced together, that hinted at the war going on beneath her calm surface. She finally cleared her throat. "We will reconvene in 15 minutes, she said quietly. "This court is in recess." A murmur rolled through the room like a slow tide. The bailiff didn't even have to gesture. People just sat there, unsure whether to move or wait. Lenny didn't turn around. Tasha, however, leaned forward from her bench and gave her uncle the smallest smile. The kind that said, "I see you." The kind that didn't need words. Judge Hartley walked briskly out the side door of the courtroom, heels quiet on the tile. Once inside her chambers, she shut the door gently and exhaled with a force that surprised even her. She sat down, elbows on the desk, and stared at the grainy, paused image of Lenny from the courtroom, camera frozen mid-effort as he tried to stand. She hadn't meant to say it. Not "please rise." It was reflex, part of 100 sentencing hearings she'd done over the years. But when he moved, when he tried, something inside her cracked. Her mind flickered to a photograph she kept in her office drawer, one she hadn't looked at in years. Her father, Sergeant Raymond Hartley, Vietnam vet. In the photo, he wasn't in uniform. He was standing in front of their childhood home in Birmingham, holding a rake in one hand, a cigarette in the other. He never talked about the war. But she remembered one thing he'd said to her when she was 13 and got into a fight defending her younger brother. If you ever see a man protect someone without being asked, he told her, you're looking at someone who remembers what fear looks like and chooses to face it anyway. And that's exactly what she saw in Leonard Brooks. 15 minutes later, Judge Hartley returned to the courtroom. She didn't resume from the bench right away. Instead, she remained standing, looking at both legal teams. I've reviewed the footage, the statements, and the testimony, she said softly. But more than that, I've listened. I've watched a man try to rise when the world told him he couldn't. That attempt spoke louder than any argument made in this room. She finally sat, then addressed Lenny directly. Mr. Brooks, you served your country. You returned home and continued to serve your community, your family, your niece. Your actions on the night in question were not without consequence, but they were not without context either. She looked toward the prosecution table. It is the court's opinion that this incident, while technically meeting the legal definition of second-degree assault, does not reflect the intent of someone acting with malice or disregard for life. Instead, it reflects a controlled, measured act in defense of a minor. A few heads in the courtroom nodded. A few blinked away tears. This court sentences you to 80 hours of community service to be completed at a local youth development center. You will also attend 6 months of community counseling, not as a punishment, but as a space to reflect, grow, and heal. There were no cheers, just relief. Soft, humble, unspoken relief. Judge Hartley paused, removing her glasses and setting them down beside her gavel. Mr. Brooks, she said finally, you don't have to stand to show the weight you carry. Today you made it visible. The gavel struck once. Court is adjourned. Lenny didn't move. Jacob Ellis gave him a light pat on the shoulder, but Lenny's eyes were fixed ahead on the judge still seated, still human. Tasha came to his side, quickly placing a hand on the handle of his wheelchair. Uncle Lenny, he turned slightly, nodded once, then whispered, let's go home. Outside, reporters crowded the sidewalk, microphones ready, cameras, blinking in the morning sun. Jacob Ellis fielded a few questions. Do you think justice was served today, one asked. He gave a slow, firm nod. Justice isn't always loud. Today it was quiet and clear. Lenny didn't stop to answer any of them. He rolled forward past the cameras, through the crowd. Tasha walked beside him, holding his hand now. Tight, certain. That evening, local news anchors called the verdict an unusual but compassionate ruling. On social media, the clip of Lenny attempting to rise had gone viral. Some people criticized the judge. Others applauded her. But none of that made its way into the red brick house on Winfield Avenue, where Lenny and Tasha sat on the porch sharing a plate of warm cornbread. He didn't talk about the trial. He didn't need to. Did it hurt? Tasha asked quietly. Lenny looked at her, puzzled. What, when you tried to stand? Did it hurt? He took a long breath. Yeah, but not the way you think. Tasha nodded like she understood. Maybe not fully, but enough. That weekend, Lenny filled out his community service paperwork. The youth center was only 5 blocks away, near the same VFW where he once helped paint the fence. He didn't ask for special treatment, just a schedule, a way to get started. Judge Hartley, meanwhile, sat alone in her office on Saturday morning, going through a stack of new case files. But her eyes kept drifting to the photograph in her drawer. Her father. That rake. That silence. And for the first time in her career, she paused between cases, not to catch her breath, but to consider who these people were. Really were. Lenny showed up at the youth center that following Tuesday morning just after 9 a.m. The director, a cheerful man named Marcus Lane, greeted him outside with a warm handshake and a clipboard full of waivers. Heard about you, Marcus said without judgment. Not from the news, from the kids. One of them called you the man who tried to stand. Lenny chuckled softly, the first real smile in days. Guess that's one way to be remembered. His job wasn't complicated, supervising activity hours, guiding the younger teens through community gardening projects, and leading a once-weekly workshop on handling conflict without violence. The first day, the kids were shy, curious but cautious. By day 3, they were calling him Mr. Brooks or Coach Lenny. A few even stayed late to help clean up without being asked. He didn't preach. He didn't lecture. He just listened. Asked questions like, what makes you feel safe and when do you know it's okay to speak up? He never brought up the trial, but the kids had seen the clip. They knew. Back at home, Tasha was settling into a new rhythm too. Her teachers noticed it right away. She was more vocal in class. She started helping a sixth grader who struggled with reading. When asked why she volunteered, she simply replied, because I know what it feels like to not have someone stand up for you. Her science teacher emailed Lenny after class one afternoon. She's still quiet, the note said, but now she raises her hand first. Meanwhile, at the courthouse, Judge Hartley was changing too, but not in ways that most people could see. Her rulings were still firm, her tone still controlled, but she'd started asking more questions, more whys before the whats. She made space for defendants to speak directly. She asked attorneys to explain context more thoroughly. Her colleagues noticed. One even joked, "You're turning soft on us, Noelle." But she didn't laugh. She just replied, maybe I'm finally learning how to see the whole picture. 3 weeks after sentencing, she did something she'd never done before. She got in her car on a quiet Saturday morning and drove to the address she had committed to Memory 212 Winfield Avenue. The lawn was freshly mowed. A faded American flag hung from a pole by the porch. Lenny was sitting out front, a water hose draped across his lap, feeding the rose bushes planted along the fence. He saw her car but didn't react. He simply turned the nozzle off, coiled the hose, and waited. She walked up the path slowly, no briefcase, no papers, no robe. Just a gray sweater and jeans. You expecting someone? She asked lightly. Nope, he said, adjusting his position. But I usually know when company's coming. She stopped a few feet from the steps. I won't stay long. I just wanted to see how you were doing. Lenny nodded. Alive, working, teaching. That's more than most get. She glanced toward the house. Tasha, okay. She's got fire in her now, he said. I think the whole town saw it light up that day. The two of them stood in silence. The breeze rustled the trees above. A dog barked somewhere down the street. My father served in Vietnam, she said suddenly, eyes fixed on a spot in the distance. He never talked about it. But I remember once when I got in trouble for hitting a boy who picked on my brother, he didn't scold me. He just said, some things you stand for, even if it costs you. Lenny nodded. Sounds like a man who knew what it meant to carry weight. I judged you too quickly, she said. Not in the courtroom. Before, when I first read the file, I thought I knew who you were. What kind of man did you think I was? She met his gaze, the kind who let pain turn into bitterness. Lenny didn't blink. That happened to your father. She hesitated. Then quietly, yes. If you came here to apologize, Lenny said after a moment, I don't need it. If you came to understand well, that's different. A small, almost invisible smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. Maybe I came for both. They stood like that a few moments longer, no more words exchanged until she turned and walked back to her car. She didn't look back. Lenny watched her leave the porch silent again except for the wind chimes tapping above his head. Weeks passed, then months. The headlines faded. The video clip stopped circulating, but the moment stayed etched into the minds of those who were there and those who watched it unfold. At the youth center, Lenny kept showing up, teaching, encouraging, asking questions. One afternoon, a boy named Ramon, maybe 11, full of fidgety energy, approached him after class. Mr. Brooks, he asked, you ever hit someone and wish you didn't? Lenny didn't hesitate. Yes and no. The boy frowned. Which one is it? It's both, Lenny said. Sometimes you don't get to pick the clean answer. Sometimes all you get is the choice in front of you, and you try to make it count. Ramon nodded slowly like that made sense. Elsewhere, life in Tuscaloosa rolled on. The courthouse kept its rhythm. The judge took her place each morning. And kids grew up a little faster than they should. But if you looked close, really close, you could feel it. Something had shifted. Not loudly, but for good. It had been nearly 3 months since the sentencing, and by now most people in Tuscaloosa had returned to their regular routines. The story of Leonard Brooks, the man who tried to stand, had faded from the headlines, replaced by new names, new cases, and the steady hum of everyday life. But some stories don't vanish just because the cameras do. They linger, in subtle ways, in unexpected places. At the youth center, Lenny was more than a volunteer. Now he was part of the rhythm. He'd arrive early, help set up for workshops, and sit with kids who didn't talk much until they did. They trusted him, not because he talked about being a veteran or told stories from the war. He didn't. He listened. And when he spoke, it mattered. One Thursday afternoon during a session on handling peer pressure, a quiet girl named Jory raised her hand. She was always the last to speak if she spoke at all. But this time she looked Lenny square in the eye and asked, "Did it hurt when you tried to stand in court?" The room went silent. Lenny didn't blink, didn't smile it away. "Yeah," he said plainly, "but not the part you think." She nodded once, then went back to her worksheet. The kids didn't ask follow-ups. They didn't need to. At home, Tasha had begun keeping a journal, not the kind filled with poetry or teenage crushes, but with thoughts, observations, notes about how people change. One entry simply read, "Some people raise their voices. My uncle raised himself." She had joined student council, given a speech about community safety, helped start a peer mentorship program at school. Her science teacher sent another email to Lenny, this one ending with, "She's becoming someone others look up to." He read it twice, then printed it out and pinned it above the kitchen table. As for Judge Noelle Hartley, she never visited Lenny again. Not because she didn't care, but because something told her that visit had been enough. She did change, though. In court, she began pausing a moment longer before reading each sentence. She added a question into her routine that she hadn't used before. "Is there anything the court needs to know about your story?" Most attorneys were caught off guard by it, but over time they came to see it as part of her process. The file still mattered, but the people mattered more. One Friday afternoon, as Lenny was finishing up a shift at the youth center, a caseworker from the VA stopped by. His name was Cliff Riggins, a soft-spoken man with a clipboard and a crooked tie. "I'm here to check on your paperwork, Mr. Brooks," he said. "Routine stuff." Also, he lowered his voice and pulled out an envelope. "I saw the footage. What you did in that courtroom. Most people talk about dignity. You showed it." Lenny took the envelope, nodded. "Just did what I could." "No," Cliff said. "You did more than that. You reminded people what it looks like to try, even when no one expects you to." That night, Lenny sat on the porch like he always did, Tasha, beside him, a notebook in her lap. Across the street, neighborhood kids tossed a football, their laughter rising like music above the hum of evening insects. "Uncle Lenny," she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah, you ever wish you hadn't done it?" He thought for a long time, eyes on the horizon where the sun was bleeding orange through the trees. "No," he said finally. "But I do wish it didn't have to happen." She nodded, thoughtful. "People still talk about it at school, but not like it's a bad thing. They say you stood up, even when you couldn't." Lenny chuckled softly. "Funny how the truth works sometimes. It bends, it sticks, but when it's real, it holds." She smiled. Yours held. And for a long while, they didn't say another word. They didn't need to, because justice, real justice, isn't always about punishment or mercy. Sometimes it's about recognition, about making people truly look at what they've overlooked. And sometimes it's not about whether you can stand. It's about choosing to try anyway. Sometimes the most powerful stories aren't the loudest. They don't come with headlines or hashtags. They come in quiet rooms with trembling hands and heavy silence. Leonard Brooks didn't raise his voice. He didn't deliver a fiery speech or demand the spotlight. What he did was try. In front of strangers, a judge, and the weight of his past, he tried. Not to prove a point, not to gain sympathy, but because someone he loved needed protecting. And in that small, sacred moment, the courtroom saw something they weren't prepared for: a man who couldn't walk, but still stood taller than anyone in the room. Judge Hartley could have sentenced him by the book, but instead she chose to see. And in doing so, she changed more than a verdict. She changed the way a system could feel. The kids at the youth center didn't remember his military medals or his trial date. They remembered that he listened, that he never talked down to them, that he answered their hardest questions with honesty. And Tasha, the girl once cornered in a parking lot, found her voice because her uncle showed her what courage looks like. So if you're still here, still listening, ask yourself, what would you stand for even if no one expected it of you? And when the moment comes, will you try? Because sometimes justice isn't a ruling, it's a reminder.